Good evening all, and welcome. Night shift can be pretty creepy, and now we're going to be embracing it. So it's time to get comfortable, grab your flashlight, and let the darkness take control. To give the context of where this story is based, I live in a smallish college town near a small to medium-sized city. The town itself doesn't have a lot of people and is mostly here to cater to the demand that comes from the college. Because of this, the stores around the college are mostly open 24/7, so that the college kids will be able to impulse buy whatever they like. The other big sellers around here is gas. Of course, gas can be bought in the city, but being a town that is often gone through in order to get to the city, a lot of places will try to keep the price of gas slightly lower than any of the stations in the city. My story begins when I was working overnights in a gas station/liquor store when I was doing part-time classes in college, but mostly doing classes online, so they wouldn't ruin my availability for a full-time job. The store that I worked at had only one person working overnights for a long time. Even though a lot of people, especially girls, would complain of the lack of cameras and the fact that you don't always get the best people going into a liquor store/gas station in the middle of the night. The owner's hand was forced one night, because I started working there, that a woman who came in to buy milk went outside to her car, only for a man to come up behind her and shove a gun to her back demanding her money. She complied with him and luckily he let her go. She ran into the store, sobbing hysterically, and though police arrived shortly after, he was never found. I personally prefer having two people on, even if there wasn't a safety issue. The nights seemed to go by so much quicker when there was someone else there, and it was really nice that the person I normally closed with, and I got along with so well. Overall, there were 4 overnight shift workers: Josh, Nick, Dixie, and myself. Dixie had another job and really was only working there as a favor to one of the managers, so she would only work 2 nights a week with either Josh or I. Josh and I worked together 3 nights a week, and Nick worked with Josh and I 2 nights a week. Dixie was really nice and fun to be around, but she didn't really particularly like the job or want to be there. Josh would get annoyed with her a lot for just standing behind the register while he did all the work, but it was only 1 night a week, so he didn't complain too much. Nick, on the other hand, was a bit different. He worked there 5 days a week, just like Josh and I, but they never seemed to put him with one person for more than a week. No one seemed to really like him, or enjoyed working with him. Nick was a little off from the start. He was one of those people who told you his entire life story as soon as you met him, giving a bunch of really personal details that no one really wants to know or feels comfortable hearing. One thing he always seemed to talk about was the strain on his marriage. Apparently, he had had a really bad drinking and drug problem for a very long time, and the drug part got better when he could switch over to weed. But he couldn't seem to get his drinking under control. He was hard to be around, but you kind of get used to some people in that kind of job being sketchy. I was there for almost 3 months, when Nick's stories seemed to escalate out of nowhere. He began telling people that when he was younger, he was diagnosed as a psychopath, and he had to take a bunch of pills for it every day so he wouldn't become violent. Not exactly what you want to hear from someone you're alone with in the middle of the night, but okay. We all have our problems, and some people get dealt a bad hand when it comes to mental illness. I myself always struggled to get my anxiety and depression under control, and without medicine, I wouldn't be killing people by any means. I'd probably be hospitalized in danger to self categories, so as creepy as that was, I assured him that a lot of people needed to take medication for some kind of illness, and as long as you stick to it and are honest with medical professionals, there's no reason you can't still do anything anyone else can do. He seemed pleased with this answer, and soon after the subject was turned to other things. He was especially cheery and nice to me after that for the next week or so, letting me know daily that he was taking his medicine and felt like things were going well with him. I always answered enthusiastically, but I'm pretty sure everyone, especially Josh, was aware of how much I wish he would stop talking to me about it and would leave me alone. Josh had a wife and a daughter who was 2 at the time, so he couldn't help but see us younger girls through the eyes of what his daughter might potentially have to deal with when she was our age, and seemed to go out of his way to end my conversations with Nick rather quickly, which I was grateful for, and didn't really try to pretend that he liked Nick. It wasn't before long Nick started conversations with me, going into details about why he was diagnosed, instead of how his medicine was working, which I won't get into here because a lot of it is very violent. I told him repeatedly that I didn't want to know about that, to which he would act like he misunderstood and changed the subject, only for him to circle back to it about an hour later. When I confided to Dixie about it, she told me that she would take care of it and told her friend, which was the manager who asked her to come work there. The manager couldn't really do much, since I seemed to be the only one that he would talk to about these things, and told me to come to her again if he made me feel uncomfortable. It was starting to get increasingly tense for everyone working there. After he was talked to by the manager, and soon after 2 other women who worked with him on the night shift reported comments he made to them to the manager. I was questioned, in which I agreed that all of the statements made by the women were similar to things that had been said to me. Nick was given a final warning and a write-up. The next few times I saw him, he would go on rants about how people there were only reporting him because they didn't like him. I assumed he didn't know that I had been questioned too, and neither Josh and I had any intention of telling him. He got so angry at one point that he practically was in tears, saying how lucky those twats were, that he was on his meds, and what he would do to them if he was not. Fortunately, it was about that point that his shift ended, and pretty much as soon as he clocked out, Josh told him that we had a lot of work to get done that night, so we didn't really have time to chat. He nodded and walked out the door without another word. Josh wasn't lying either. The truck had come extremely late that day, so there was still quite a bit of things that needed to be put on the shelf. One thing that the earlier shifts never seemed to do, unless they absolutely had to, was stocking the drink coolers. It is true that they're easier to do at night, but when there were a lot less customers, so it was annoying since we couldn't chat. But we went with it, and I can't remember the time that Josh went into the drink cooler, but it must have been pretty late since we had been there a while. At that point, I was still focused on stocking the shelves and making sure everything looked full if we didn't have it, when the bell chimed signaling someone had come in. I threw out a good evening and I'll be right there, since anyone that comes in that late usually only wanted a pack of cigarettes or to pay for gas in cash. I put down my box and went to the registers, slowing dramatically once I could see them. You guessed it. There was Nick, not looking at me but leaning next to my register. I'd be lying if I said I had a reason to be afraid. It did turn out he was drunk, but I couldn't detect it right away from the smell of booze that always seemed to linger in the air around there, and Josh was right on the other side of the wall. Even so, I considered for about 30 seconds if I should actually go, or if I should run into the cooler and get Josh. Nick wasn't a young, fit guy or anything. Years of drugs and drinking had aged him prematurely and ruined his body, but he was still intimidating to a 20-year-old girl. Unfortunately, Nick made the decision for me when, probably tired of waiting, turned towards me, and that's when I noticed immediately that there was something off about him. My voice was nothing more than a pathetic whisper when I asked him what he wanted. He just stared at me, nothing on his face to tell me what he was thinking. I was about to speak again when he spoke, barely intelligible because of his slurring. "He leave you here alone?" It took me a second to shake my head and tell him in a hopeful, steady voice that Josh was in the cooler and asked if he wanted me to get him. Again, staring at me in silence. At this point, I didn't even care what he said. I just wanted him to say something. The silent staring was creeping me out. I asked with more force in my voice, "What do you want, Nick?" As soon as I stopped speaking, he grinned at me in a disgusting, almost singing voice. "You're lying. You're alone." He laughed and took a step towards me but stumbled, allowing me to take several steps back. At this point, I should have run to Josh. I should have called for him. Anything. But I couldn't believe that I was reading the situation right. Nick was really weird, but I had never felt an actual danger around him before. He had never come off as more than a little unstable. He continued to come forward in slow, stumbling steps, telling me to come here and that he just wanted to talk. I kept out of his reach, telling him to back off and that I could hurt him if I had to. He thought that was particularly amusing and laughed loudly enough that Josh told me later that was what caused him to look through the spaces of the racks and see what was going on. Josh was out the door in a second and seemed to come out of nowhere, shoving himself in between Nick and I. They didn't even say anything, just stared at each other down before Josh said in a stern tone, "I think you should leave now." Nick stared blankly for a moment, then scoffed, telling us that we couldn't take a joke. I was trying not to cry at this point. The only thing more terrifying about the situation was knowing that if Josh hadn't been there, and he somehow had caught me, I would have stood no chance against him. Josh left me standing, with my back against the wall, coralining Nick to the door. Completely unexpected on both our parts, Nick turned and took a swing at Josh. Luckily, either because Josh was drunk or really uncoordinated, he missed Josh's face, and Josh grabbed the back of his coat and brought him down as he smashed his knee into Nick's stomach, and used the opportunity of his spluttering to drag him to the door and throw him out, locking it. Josh had just turned and told me to call the cops as we heard this sickening crack behind him. We both jumped up and looked at the door to find this big circle of glass. It's hard to explain, but if you've ever seen a movie or an actual car wreck, when something hits a windshield but not hard enough to break through and it just turns all white around the point of impact, that's what the door looked like. Josh didn't have to tell me what to do. I ran to the register, grabbed my phone, going to the corner furthest away from the front door, and huddled on the floor. I didn't even notice at the time, but Josh told me later that when he turned to see the glass, that was the first time he noticed that Nick had a hunting knife in his other hand. The fact that he had tried to punch Josh instead of stab him is a mystery and a miracle. I was sobbing when the operator picked up the phone. I don't even know how she understood me. I was crying so hard. But between my distress and the sounds of Josh and Nick yelling at each other in the background, with loud smashes of Nick hitting the door, she got the urgency of the situation. She asked me where I was, and luckily she knew the address, because just as I got up to look at the receipt to see what the address was, the glass smashed. I dropped back to the floor and she told me that officers were already on their way, and to do whatever I could to get away or hide, even if I had to leave Josh. The hole wasn't big enough for him to get through, and he had made it by grabbing the ashtray from outside and throwing it at the part of the window he had been repeatedly punching, causing it to break through. He didn't make it to break through though. From that hole he could only reach the lock on the door. According to Josh, he walked to the door and put his mouth against the hole that he had formed and said something that I'm sobbing right now even thinking about it, in that horrible sing-song voice that he used the first time I spoke to him that night. He said in such a happy tone, "They're never going to find you two." Needless to say, as tough as he was acting, Josh was crapping bricks as much as I was. He was older than Nick, in his mid-30s, but he was a beanpole and wasn't exactly known for his fighting skills. Even so, as soon as Nick unlocked and started to open the door, Josh slammed his body into it, knocking Nick backwards from the impact. Josh yelled for me to run, and even though my legs felt like they would give out at any moment, I ran right behind him to the receiving doors in the back of the store. Nick was cursing and yelling at us as the door jingle went off. Josh slammed into the back door, cursing in pain, as he realized it wouldn't open. We later found out that Nick had pushed the dumpster in front of the door, locking the wheels of it against us before he came in. We seemed to both realize at once that he actually planned this. Nick rounded the corner, still doing that awkward stumbling walk, though faster now. It at least gave me some time to slam the back room door shut and lock it. I was sitting in front of it, Josh bringing over anything he could find to barricade the door shut. When Nick reached it, he must have heard me crying, because he kept calling out my name, telling me it wasn't me he wanted. He would make sure that I passed before I even felt the pain if I opened the door. He then started stabbing the door, screaming at me to open it. I screamed and moved when he stabbed it the first time, but Josh and I both moved immediately to hold it shut again. I remember Josh and I making eye contact. We were both crying by now, and I wanted so badly to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't think of anything to say. I had dropped my phone when I ran to hold the door shut, and neither of us could move to get to it, so we had no idea how long until the police got there, and the door was made of wood, so it wouldn't last long against his body slams and offered no protection if his knife went into one of our hands. All I could think about was that I was going to pass here, that my dog would never know why I never came home, that I would never get my degree, that I have enough money to actually start life, that all of the plans for my future, my girlfriend and I, would never happen. In the most anticlimactic and wonderful finish ever, it suddenly went silent. There were no police, car alarms, no yelling, nothing. It was as if Nick had just vanished. Josh and I looked at each other, not even daring to breathe, listening for any sign of life on the other side of the door. We both slammed to the ground when a gunshot went off at once, then twice, then a third time. There was more silence. Then a voice rang out asking if anyone was here. We weren't sure if we should say something. Then the voice continued with his name and that he was an off-duty EMT who had been listening to the scanner. Josh got up and pushed the things aside in front of the door, opening it just enough to put his head out. And then it seemed like the breath just left him. He opened the door and went out into the store, relief all over him. I ran and grabbed my phone, seeing that the call had disconnected or the dispatcher had hung up. When I went out into the store where Josh and our rescuer was, he was in the middle of explaining how the police, over the scanner, were sending a bunch of cars, but they were all pretty far away, and he had a horrible feeling that they wouldn't get there in time when the dispatcher was telling them what they'd find when they got there. He didn't want either of us to go outside until the police got there, because though Nick had been shot in the shoulder, he still had the knife when he took off. The EMT said he would run after him, but with the state the store was in, he was scared that someone in there could be hurt or dying. The next 20 minutes were a blur. Josh and I were sitting on the floor hugging each other when the police got there. The EMT had called dispatch and told them of the new situation, and most of the cars that were coming to our location were diverted to look for Nick. It was soon after that Josh got to use his phone to call his wife, and she came right over, only bringing their daughter because he begged her to. He seemed to completely break down when he held his daughter and hugged his wife. I had an extremely similar reaction when I finally got home and came in to see my dog's body wiggling excitedly, proudly displaying his flamingo toy for me as a welcome gift. Nick was found 2 weeks later in an old RV in the woods that he had been using to do his drinking and drugs in so that his wife wouldn't catch him. Apparently the reason that he had come after us was because he thought that the reason that Josh wanted him to leave so quickly was so that he could call the owner again, and this time the complaint would get him fired. Unknown to us, his wife had kicked him out 4 days before this happened, and was in the process of getting a restraining order against him over threatening texts and phone calls she had been receiving. He stated that his job was all that he had left, and Josh needed to be punished for trying to take that away from him. He said that I wasn't the target, and he didn't want to have to kill me, but he knew that he had a much better chance of ending Josh's life with me there than Dixie there, since Josh would be more likely to face him to protect me. Neither Josh or I called the owner or even a manager over his comments that night, though maybe we should have. In hindsight, it was disturbing what he was saying, but we were so used to him being a creep and saying really horrible things at that point, that it didn't even register to us that he could seriously be thinking about trying to hurt someone. I had known him for 3 months, and Josh had known him for 6, and he had never done anything violent towards anyone. Everyone just thought he was all talk. We also put faith in the fact that every employee had a background check on them before they were hired, so it's not like Nick had ever been violent before. He took a plea deal so that the 2 counts of attempted murder would be dropped, and he would go instead to a mental hospital for offenders. The reason that I'm sharing this story now, other than the other stories on this subreddit inspiring me, is that I got a call 2 weeks ago notifying me that as long as there is no setbacks to his health status, Nick is set to be released on June 8th of this year, Mort's birthday. When I called Josh, he said that he had received the same news that day. Neither Josh or I work there anymore, and Josh has since moved away to another town on the other side of the city, and I have switched to going to college completely online, and am now in a new place that I'm renting with a roommate. I don't think he'll come after either of us. I don't see how he could blame us for what happened. I've heard so many of these stories, and after the fact, everyone seems so prepared for what to do if they ever see the person they're writing about again. I don't think I'll be any more prepared to face him this time than I was back then. I've had pretty intense nightmares ever since that day. But ever since I got that call, every time I close my eyes, all I can hear is that one sentence louder and clearer than I ever have heard it since it was actually said. They're never going to find you two. Nick, if it was true that you were diagnosed as a psychopath, I hope you're getting the help you need. You already destroyed my peace of mind, and even now, years later, I don't feel safe, especially at night. I don't believe in God, but I pray to anyone that's listening that we never meet again. When I was 17, I got a job working for a major thrift store chain in North Seattle, a location considered by many to be sketchy. The MO of this chain was to buy up old grocery stores or other serviceable old buildings and open up stores. The building was, I believe, one of the old grocery stores of the area. It was tiny and very old. I had made a few friends while working there, most of whom I'm still friends with today, and recently this was brought back up. It blows my mind I could have forgotten this because it's the only actual tangible evidence I've ever seen with my own two eyes of real paranormal activity. Here's what went down. One night after everyone went home, the security alarm went off. That flagged the security company to send a police car and to inform the building owners. So on and so forth down the chain of command until it landed at my friend, the store's supervisor's, feet. Since he lived within walking distance of the store, he was responsible for meeting with the patrol and verifying that the building was all clear. And it was. With that taken care of, everyone went about their business. The next day, he obviously checked the security footage to see what might have set off the alarm. He actually called me and a few others into the office to show us the footage. Let me describe the layout for you, so you can get a better mental image of this first. The front of the store was an entire wall of floor-to-ceiling windows with 3 doors. An entrance, an exit, and an emergency exit with a big red handle that would trip the alarm if used. The registers stood between that front wall and the racks of clothing, with each rack having a little end cap sign on a little metal post. If you've thrift shopped, I'm sure you know what they look like, as it's pretty much the same in every shop. The back part of the store, the employee-only area, had a bunch of racks of clothing waiting to be priced that sat there for the next morning. So he showed us this CCTV footage. It's dark, it's empty, and nothing seems to be happening for a minute. Then, one of the end cap signs starts to slowly spin. This I could easily write off as a vent draft or something, but things started picking up. The CCTV would pan back and forth between the camera, overlooking the front windows / registers / partial view of the racks, and end cap signs to the back of the housing area where we processed all donations. In the back, you could see the sleeve of a coat being lifted, as though it were being pinched at the cuff and lifted above the collar before being dropped again, over and over. That could not be explained by a draft. Back to the front camera. The sign is now spinning extremely fast, and the crappy cardboard signs that hang with fishing line from the ceiling are swaying like crazy, almost like an earthquake. And then the glass window actually started flexing violently. The red handle on the emergency exit door, a long metal bar, almost as long as the actual door at the front, thrusted up and down, while the whole door and surrounding windows looked like they were being wailed on by someone, or several somebodies. This is what set the alarm off. There was no one there. The parking lot was visible through the glass, and there was not a single person in that entire place. All the activity started very slowly and ramped up into a somewhat violent frenzy, and then just stopped. All within maybe a 1 to 2 minute span. So I have no proof, but it's very frustrating, as the footage has been lost. But I can't think of any logical explanation for any of it. I'm flawed, and I will never be able to forget what I've seen. And that was the better part of a decade ago now. For the first 2 years after graduating nursing school, I have worked in this nursing home. The things I have experienced at my night shifts have made me believe in the paranormal. I will share my experiences with you. Some are about patients that have recently passed, and a story about a poltergeist haunting me at work. Background. The nursing home itself is only 20 years old and quite modern. There is a large tree yard with all kinds of fruit trees, and there are some water surrounding the property. The nursing home houses about 100 patients. All of these patients have dementia in the later stages of the disease. Because of this, many of the patients pass within the nursing home. Our job as caretakers is to make their lives as enjoyable as possible and bring comfort in the last stages of their lives. An older male patient of my ward developed pneumonia and passed within a week. This man was not able to speak much more. The only things he would say is, "Who can help me?" in a very distinct voice. 5 days later, I had my first of 4 night shifts. A message appeared on my pager that a sensor detected movement in another room at the end of the hallway. When I went to take care of the patient that probably needed a pee, I walked by the room of the deceased male. When I crossed his door, I heard him call in his distinct voice, "Who can help me?" Not being able to think very fast, I planned to take looks at what's going on after I helped the patient from my pager. A few minutes later, I stood within the now empty door from which the deceased called out. Only then I remembered he was to be cremated the next day. Chills went down my spine as I realized. After this experience, I studied a bit more about the paranormal. Many of my more experienced night shift colleagues told me they were experiencing similar events. I also got told about a probable poltergeist who resided in another ward, in a more abandoned room in the other ward. A few months went by and the occasional feeling of being followed occurred. I have also had an experience where the temperature around me would drop drastically and I would suddenly feel freezing. I later found out this could mean there was a ghost present. We had 2 house cats that were always fighting each other in the hallways. Besides that, they are sweet and cuddly pets who spend a lot of time being loved and petted by the patients. These cats would sit at the door of patients that were passing. They didn't make any noise, they just sat there waiting. Sometimes they even tried to sneak into the room of that patient just to sit on their beds. After a few months, I transferred to the ward with the probable poltergeist. The feeling of being watched continued frequently in this ward, and we had many more paranormal occurrences. When a patient passed, sometimes bed sensors would go off randomly in the rooms of these patients. This was frequent to happen after the patient passed, and lasted until they were either buried or cremated, which usually happens a week later here in the Netherlands. My understanding and interest about the paranormal grew, and the more I knew, the more obvious things would happen. Within a month, I experienced another situation like the first experience I described. A patient with a distinctive cry. She always cried, due to illness. She shared a room with another female patient. When I went to check on the woman after the other one had passed, I was about to close the door to the room when the distinctive crying of the deceased woman filled the room. This went on for 5 seconds and then just stopped, and the room was quiet again. Now, the poltergeist I mentioned. The room that he inhabits is number 3, which has something to do with the evil spirits according to Ghost Adventures. The room was used in the times where the nursing home was full of patients to house the terminally ill, as lots of patients passed there. The room kind of fell out of commission when the demand for nursing home beds went down. People that were passing could be nursed in their own homes since there was no longer a waiting list for new patients. The poltergeist would follow me around the ward if I passed the room. When I got an uneasy feeling of being followed, I knew that it was there. Sometimes it would make my emotions go from really angry to being sad to the point I had to fight not to cry. Being a young male, this is abnormal for me. At some point, the sensor of that room would go off, even when there was no one in that room, and the sensor wasn't activated. I never had the guts to go into that room alone, and always asked for backup. A lot of my regular night shift colleagues knew what went on in that room, and would always be very helpful. Sometimes sounds like small knocks on the doors could be heard, or the walls, and I once heard something scratching inside the door. There was also a time I saw a figure standing in the window of room 3. The figure had a human appearance, but was plain black. It really freaked me out. There was one colleague in particular that I would share my experiences with. She was paranormally gifted and could see ghosts, and has the ghost of a small boy in her home. She told me the poltergeist couldn't do anything to me if I didn't let it. The tip she gave me was to speak to the entity and tell it not to bother me, or to leave me alone, and for the most part this did help. Around the time this happened a lot to the irregular night shift colleagues, and they quit because of this. But using the tip I got from my colleague, the night shift became more relaxed to me, and not being stressed out about this cheeky spirit. My theory is that when people pass, their spirits remain within the nursing home, mostly residing in their room or ward. Sometimes they might try to contact people by saying something or making a noise. I don't really know. No one truly does. But after they tend to be buried or cremated, I feel like their spirits move on. I've never really believed in the paranormal, but haven't denied it either. But after tonight, I'm 110% sure that it exists. I work in a care home for the mentally challenged / severely handicapped. We have 2 people working night shift, one awake and one sleeping in case something happens that needs 2 people. Yesterday was my first awake night shift. Nothing spectacular happened, just sounds I've never heard while working day, and didn't really pay any mind to it. I just thought it was weird. The sound I noticed most sounded like someone using a belt and slapping it against something with a little bit of force, but not a lot, and the timing between is erratic, but not longer than 3 seconds between each, and not shorter than 1 second. My shift starts at 9. Nothing really weird happened, just the sounds that I heard the day before started to begin around 10. My colleague that has worked there for several years commented on the belt sound and said that he had never heard it before. Now, I begin to feel uneasiness in my body. Just me expecting the worst. The belt sound stopped after 4 to 5 whips. Everything is quiet and sound until 2. That's when I have to give someone their medicine. Just outside the person's apartment, there is an entrance, 10 meters in front of the door to the apartment. The entrance door is made of thick and sturdy glass and metal. Just when I'm going to try and give the person their medicine, I hear a really loud sound from the entrance. It literally sounded like someone ran right into the door. I know how it sounds because every apartment building in the neighborhood has that kind of door as an entrance, and in my drunken adventures I've run into one of them and know exactly what it sounds like. really didn't pay that much attention to it, started wrapping up and heading out of the apartment, and went into the next one to take the trash out. Just as I exit, I hear someone tugging at the door handle with all the might of an angry teenager at the staff toilet door that's right around the corner. I stop dead in my track, and my heart skips a beat. I hastily check the door, and it's open. The goddamn door is open, and I can guarantee on my mother's grave that I closed it 10 minutes earlier. Now I'm scared. I check every door in the whole building, and every door that is supposed to be closed and locked is locked and closed. It's impossible that it was my colleague, since I would have heard the staff sleeping room door open and close since it's right next to the staff toilet. After that, I walked into the staff room and have been sitting here for 2 hours since I'm too scared to move, and I don't want to step 1 foot outside until 5 a.m. Everything that's supposed to be done is done too. Just 3 hours left of this shift. I'm sure I'm gonna have bad nightmares now. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's night shift stories. That first one was certainly tense. Damn, I think that's one of the better night shift stories I've read in a long time. Maybe even story in general. I hope you did like the video. If you did, you know what to do. As always, huge thanks to my lovely patrons whose names can be seen on screen. If you are inclined to donate something to Patreon and to get some cool perks for doing so, you can find that information in the description. And if you want to share a story of your own, the information is there too. Basically, check out the description for more info on anything. So yeah, these are the stories for today. I know I have been saying that I really wanted to do cryptids and more foresty stories, and I really do. But seeing as the day before I had a technical problem, I couldn't upload, and yesterday we had another collaboration, it just didn't feel right to start it towards the end of the week. I like starting things fresh. And it turns out that the 1st of June is a Monday. So we'll probably be launching those themes on the Monday. And I like doing forest and thingy stories every month. So yeah, it kind of fits. Nature stories coming soon. And cryptids. Got people requesting skinwalkers, and yes, they're coming, don't you worry. Might make it extra long as well. Depends on what I've got. We've built up a neat little archive now. It must have been a while since I did it last time. I'm rambling, so I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your day. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.